Well, all right. Nice fall day. Didn't want to get out the cold weather gear today, so we went out in the Nissan Pro 4X Frontier. Just take a ride and look at the beautiful scenery. Hard to imagine that as beautiful and tranquil as it can be looking at the old J.J. Hamilton dog trot here in Holland Park in Weatherford, that I could relay this story that took place in 1863. I want to read a little bit here about it and share the story with you. August 10th, 1863, Parson J.J. Hamilton, a Christian minister who lived on Patrick's Creek just 9 miles south of Weatherford, sent his sons, William and Stuart, to go to the parson's tannery to air out hides. Just before noon, when William and Stuart were returning home, the Indians surrounded and killed each of them. William the older was scalped, and the savages cut an ear off of Stuart's head. Savages also stormed the home of Mr. and Mrs. F.C. Brown. They lived about 1.5 miles east of Parson Hamilton in the same community. Mr. Brown was serving as a soldier in the Confederate Army and was gone. Mrs. Harriet Brown, his wife, and their 8 children remained at the home. The children's names and approximations were Sarah 16, Martha Ann 13, Jane 11, Elizabeth 10, Moe 8, and Joseph 5, and twin babies 10 months old, Tennessee and Estelle. During the preceding night, Sarah dreamed the Indians killed her mother, and so strongly was she impressed with the dream that Sarah prevailed on Mrs. Brown to have her neighbor, Mr. Gatlin, a gunsmith who lived about 300 yards north, to repair a broken rifle. Mrs. Brown took the gun to the Gatlin home early in the morning, but since Mr. Gatlin was away, the mother left the rifle at the Gatling residence. When the Indians were killing William and Stuart Hamilton, they were seen by Mrs. Brown and some of her children, but at the time only thought the Indians were cowmen. Joseph Brown was a short distance from the house on Patrick's Creek watching William Welch and his family wash wool. Shortly afterwards, the Indians came to the Brown residence, and for the first time the citizens knew the horsemen were warriors instead of cowmen. Mrs. Brown sent Elizabeth down to the creek to notify Mr. Welch and family and Joseph, but Mr. Welch had already discovered the savages, scattered his family, and made himself and 2 African boys conspicuous for the purpose of decoying the red men away. The savage followed them for a short distance and then turned back for what they considered more valuable prey. When Elizabeth attempted to return home, she was captured by the savages and placed on a horse behind an Indian. As the savages approached, Sarah started toward the home of Mr. Gatlin with Tennessee, one of the 10-month-old twins, and was followed by the Indians, who shot her with an arrow under the right shoulder near the spine. Sarah then quit the road and went into a nearby thicket, and in her wounded condition finally reached the Gatlin home with the twin baby. Jane Brown, who is now Mrs. Newt Pickard of Weatherford, had already preceded Sarah with Estelle, the other 10-month-old twin. Martha Ann and Moe had also gone to the Gatlin home. Sarah knew that Jane was ahead with the other twin, but Mrs. Brown did not, and thinking perhaps her infant baby, Estelle, was sleeping on the bed, Mrs. Brown turned back toward their home to get the other baby. Sarah, too, could have reached the Gatlin home without being injured, but she lingered behind and was repeatedly telling her mother and the other twin was ahead. Mrs. Brown, however, in her dilemma, did not hear, but hurried back to the Brown home. This pioneer mother was shot 9 times and killed almost instantly. The savages, however, did not scalp her, perhaps because she had black hair. Since all the Indians are black-headed as rule and much less inclined to scalp a person with covered hair of that color. After Mrs. Brown had been killed, the house was vacated and the savages ripped up the feather beds, took the ticking and bedclothes and other trinkets and happened to suit their fancy. Well, it's just one of those things that as they come about and those raiding parties started, they just, at their discretion, took advantage of the weak. So again, on a beautiful day like today, it's just hard to imagine how brutal those times could be.